Welcome to Cafe Stories, where every story is a new mystery waiting to be solved. Grab a coffee, stay curious, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let's get started. Sherlock Holmes and the Man Who Cheated Death. Chapter 1. The Uninvited Visitor. It was a particularly dismal evening in the autumn of 1895, when the events that would soon demand every ounce of Sherlock Holmes's formidable intellect began to unfold. Outside our shared quarters at 221B Baker Street, the fog had gathered in a thick, clinging embrace, suffocating the gaslights and reducing them to dim orbs that barely illuminated the cobblestone streets below. The rhythmic clatter of a distant carriage and the occasional bark of a stray dog punctuated the otherwise muffled ambience of the London night. Inside, the scene was one of serene domesticity. Holmes, reclined in his armchair, the tips of his fingers pressed together, appeared lost in contemplation, though whether his mind was occupied with criminal intrigue or abstract philosophy, I could not say. His pipe emitted occasional wisps of smoke, curling lazily toward the ceiling like ghosts of thoughts unspoken. I had been perusing the evening edition of the Times, its headlines filled with mundane political squabbles and financial forecasts that to my mind seemed worlds apart from the adventures we had lived. It was during this unremarkable moment that fate intervened, as it so often does, with a knock upon the door, a knock that, though ordinary in its sound, carried with it the weight of something extraordinary. "Mrs. Hudson." I called, but before our landlady could respond, I heard the shuffle of hesitant footsteps ascending the stairs. The door to our sitting room creaked open, and there stood a woman whose very presence seemed an embodiment of distress. She was of middle age, dressed in garments of fine but subdued quality, her bonnet slightly askew as though she had hurriedly donned it. Her gloved hands trembled as she clutched at the folds of her cloak. But it was her eyes that drew my attention most keenly, eyes clouded not merely by tears, but by the unmistakable shadow of fear. "Pray do come in," said Holmes, rising swiftly from his chair and gesturing toward the seat opposite his own. "You are among friends here, madam. Allow Dr. Watson to take your cloak, and perhaps you would be so good as to tell us what troubles you." She sank into the offered chair, as though her strength had abandoned her entirely. With a nod of thanks, she allowed me to relieve her of the damp cloak, which I hung by the fire to dry. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief before finally speaking, her voice tremulous but determined. "My name is Margaret Statham," she began. "I come to you not merely on my own behalf, but in the name of my father, Sir Edwin Statham, who passed from this life scarcely a fortnight ago." Holmes's expression did not change, though I, for my part, offered my condolences. He merely nodded and encouraged her to continue. "I thought my grief would be the only burden I would bear," she said. "But 3 days after we laid him to rest I received this." With that, she retrieved a folded piece of paper from her handbag and handed it to Holmes. He examined it closely, his keen eyes darting over the handwriting, the ink, the creases of the paper itself. "Remarkable," he murmured, before passing it to me. I read the contents with growing incredulity. The letter read, "My dearest Margaret, do not let grief consume you. Though my body rests beneath the earth, I write to assure you that my soul is at peace. There are matters beyond the veil of mortality that the living cannot yet understand, but know this: I have found rest. Do not seek answers that may trouble your heart. Let this be a final goodbye. With eternal love, your father, Edwin Statham." "Is this your father's handwriting?" I asked, turning to Lady Margaret. "Yes," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I have no doubt. I have seen his letters countless times, and this is unmistakably his." "Precisely," said Holmes, leaning back in his chair and tapping his fingers together once more. "A letter from beyond the grave, Watson. Such correspondences are rare, though not unprecedented in certain superstitious circles. But, Lady Margaret, you strike me as a woman of reason. Why come to us and not dismiss this as some cruel hoax?" "Because of Dr. Victor Fairburn," she replied, her voice dropping to a whisper, as though the mere mention of the name carried with it an air of dread. "My father had been under his care for nearly a year before his death. Dr. Fairburn's treatments were said to be miraculous. He claimed to have discovered a method of halting the aging process, even reversing certain afflictions. My father believed him, as did many others of his standing, and sought his services in the hope of prolonging his life." Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "Dr. Victor Fairburn," he repeated. "Yes, I have heard the name. A man of considerable repute in the more experimental corners of medicine. Tell me, did your father show any signs of improvement under his care?" Lady Margaret hesitated, then shook her head. "At first, yes. He seemed invigorated, more youthful in both appearance and spirit. But then his health began to decline rapidly. He grew pale, weak, and complained of strange dreams that haunted his nights. Dr. Fairburn assured us it was part of the process, but within weeks my father was gone." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the crackling of the fire. Then Holmes rose and began to pace, a sure sign that his mind was working at a rapid pace. "And the letter? Was it delivered by post?" "No," she said. "It was left on my doorstep. There was no sign of who had delivered it." "Curious," Holmes muttered. He paused by the window, gazing out into the fog as though seeking answers within its shifting depths. Finally, he turned back to Lady Margaret. "You have done well to come to me," he said. "A man who writes after death, Lady Margaret, is either a victim or an architect of something devilish. I shall endeavour to discover which. Watson, we have work to do." Lady Margaret stood, visibly relieved that her burden had been shared. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice steadier now. "I fear what you may uncover, but I know that you are the only one who can uncover it." As she departed into the misty night, her figure soon swallowed by the fog, I turned to Holmes. "What do you make of it?" He smiled faintly. "I make of it, Watson, the beginning of a most peculiar investigation, one that promises to test the limits of life, death, and all that lies between." With that enigmatic declaration, he resumed his seat, relit his pipe, and immersed himself in thought, while I could not help but feel that we had already taken the first step into a labyrinth of mystery from which there would be no easy escape. Chapter 2. The Curious Case of Dr. Victor Fairburn. The morning dawned with a crispness that seemed to sharpen both the mind and the senses, as if the very air of London was aware of the intrigue that lay ahead. Holmes and I set out early, our cab taking us through the busy streets toward Kensington, where the famed clinic of Dr. Victor Fairburn was located. The district, home to many of London's affluent citizens, wore an air of opulence, even under the grey skies that threatened rain. As we approached the grand building that housed Fairburn's practice, I noted its impressive facade, pristine white stone columns framing a heavy oak door, the brass knocker gleaming like a beacon of wealth and privilege. We stepped inside to a world that was, in many ways, a stark contrast to the liveliness of the city outside. The clinic was eerily sterile, its marble floors polished to a mirror finish, and the air infused with the faint scent of antiseptic and lavender. A receptionist, a woman of severe countenance, greeted us and led us through a hallway adorned with portraits of notable clients, lords, baronesses and men of industry, all bearing the unmistakable glow of renewed youth. "Dr. Fairburn will see you shortly," she said, her tone more mechanical than welcoming. We were shown into a spacious office, its decor reflecting a blend of medical professionalism and indulgent luxury. A large mahogany desk stood at the centre, flanked by bookshelves crammed with medical tomes and treatises on aging, biology, and obscure rejuvenation theories. A large window overlooked a meticulously maintained garden, its hedges trimmed to geometric perfection. "Watson, observe the precision," Holmes murmured as he paced the room, his gaze lingering on the neatly aligned papers atop the desk and the array of glass jars containing preserved specimens. "This is not merely a clinic, it is a laboratory, a stage for experimentation." Before I could respond, the door opened and Dr. Victor Fairburn entered. He was a man of medium height, but commanding presence, his neatly tailored suit and silver hair lending him an air of sophistication. His eyes, sharp and calculating, met ours with the cool detachment of a man accustomed to scrutiny. "Ah, Mr. Holmes," he said, extending a hand in greeting. His gaze shifted to me, lingering for a moment before he added, "And you must be?" "I am John Watson," I replied, meeting his gaze. "Dr. John Watson?" "Very well, Dr. Watson," Fairburn said with a slight nod before returning his attention to Holmes. "Mr. Holmes, to what do I owe the pleasure of this visit?" Holmes accepted the handshake, but did not linger. "We have come to inquire about one of your former patients, Sir Edwin Statham. I understand you provided him with treatments meant to enhance longevity and vitality." Fairburn's expression did not waver, though his fingers tightened subtly around the edge of the desk, a gesture I did not miss, nor did Holmes. "Ah, Sir Edwin," Fairburn said, adopting a tone of professional solemnity. "A tragic loss. He was a distinguished gentleman and one of my more devoted clients. His passing came as a shock to us all." "Indeed," Holmes replied, his voice neutral. "Could you elaborate on the nature of the treatments you provided him?" "Certainly," Fairburn said, gesturing for us to sit. "My work focuses on the restoration of cellular vitality. I employ a regimen of carefully calibrated injections derived from a proprietary formula, the components of which are drawn from both natural and synthetic sources. My methods are the culmination of years of research into the mechanisms of aging. Many of my clients experience remarkable improvements in energy, appearance, and overall health." "And yet," Holmes interjected, "Sir Edwin's condition deteriorated rather dramatically before his death. Did you anticipate such a reversal?" Fairburn leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he considered the question. "Every medical intervention carries risks, Mr. Holmes. I made that clear to Sir Edwin from the outset. His decline was unexpected but not inexplicable. The human body can sometimes react unpredictably, especially when it is subjected to advanced treatments." Holmes nodded, though I could see the spark of suspicion igniting behind his calm exterior. "I see. And you maintained regular contact with him during his final weeks?" "I did," Fairburn replied. "I visited him twice weekly to monitor his progress. He reported fatigue and vivid dreams, symptoms I attributed to the metabolic changes induced by the treatment." "Vivid dreams, you say?" Holmes mused, leaning forward slightly. "Did he describe them in detail?" "Not extensively," Fairburn admitted. "He mentioned visions of his youth, old acquaintances, places he had not seen in decades. I advised him to rest and assured him that such experiences were temporary." Holmes shifted his gaze downward as though lost in thought, before abruptly changing the subject. "Dr. Fairburn, forgive me if this seems intrusive, but I couldn't help noticing the stains beneath your fingernails." Fairburn glanced down instinctively, his composure flickering for the briefest of moments. A hazard of the profession, I'm afraid, he said smoothly. Some of the compounds I work with are stubborn and difficult to clean. Curious, Holmes remarked, exchanging a glance with me. Most medical professionals I know are meticulous about hygiene. But then you are not most medical professionals, are you, Dr. Fairburn? Fairburn chuckled, though there was a tension in the sound. I suppose not. My work demands a certain degree of flexibility, but I assure you, Mr. Holmes, everything I do is in service of my patients. Holmes rose from his seat, signalling that the interview was at its end. Thank you for your time, Dr. Fairburn. I trust you won't mind if we reach out again should further questions arise. Not at all, Fairburn replied, standing as well. I am always available. We exited the clinic and stepped back into the cool morning air, the mist swirling around our feet as we walked toward the waiting cab. What do you make of him, Holmes? I asked, once we were safely inside. A man accustomed to concealing more than he reveals, Holmes replied. His hands were steady, Watson, the hands of a surgeon or a man well practiced in delicate procedures, but those stains beneath his nails were not the residue of common medical work. They were chemical traces, likely from compounds unknown to conventional science. You suspect foul play, then? I suspect deception, Holmes said. And did you notice the locked cupboard in his office? I thought back to the room and the unassuming cabinet in the corner. I did, but surely that's to be expected in a place like his. Holmes smiled faintly. Men who keep secrets in plain sight, Watson, are often unaware of how vulnerable they truly are. We must return here under different circumstances. Fairburn has secrets, and we shall uncover them soon enough. Chapter 3. A Body. Too many. The morning air in Baker Street was thick with mist when Inspector Lestrade arrived, his coat damp and glistening as though he had walked through a cloud. Holmes had been pacing the room, deep in thought, while I was enjoying the warmth of a crackling fire and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, a small comfort graciously provided by Mrs. Hudson before she retired to her duties downstairs. "There now, gentlemen, don't let it go cold," she had said with her usual no-nonsense charm, before closing the door behind her. The sudden knock at the door announced Lestrade's presence, and I rose to greet him. Lestrade stepped in, removing his hat and shaking off the moisture. His demeanour was serious, his eyes carrying the weight of something more pressing than his usual cases. "Holmes," he said without preamble, "we have a murder on our hands, one that I believe will pique your interest. Lord Henry Cranston is dead." Holmes, who had been examining a small vial under the magnifying glass at his desk, paused and looked up. "Cranston? The industrial magnate?" he asked, his tone betraying only mild curiosity. "The same," Lestrade confirmed. "We found him early this morning in his study." His butler raised the alarm after discovering him seated at his desk, as though he had simply fallen asleep. "But there's something peculiar about it, Holmes. Something I can't put my finger on." Holmes gestured for him to sit. "Tell me everything." Lestrade adjusted himself in the chair, the leather creaking under his weight. He was found with a quill in hand, a half-written letter on the desk before him. At first glance you'd think he had suffered a heart attack, but his body— Lestrade hesitated, his brows furrowing. It didn't look like a normal corpse. His skin had an unnatural pallor, but there was a peculiar lifelike quality to it, as though he had been frozen in time. I exchanged a glance with Holmes, who leaned forward, his sharp features now fully engaged. "A lifelike corpse, you say? And no immediate signs of struggle or violence?" "None," Lestrade replied. "No bruises, no wounds, just that eerie expression, as if he were trapped between life and death." Holmes steepled his fingers. "And what of the room? Were there any objects of interest?" Lestrade nodded. "This is where it becomes even stranger. There was a small vial of translucent liquid on the desk near his hand. I brought it with me, thinking you might want to examine it." He produced the vial from his coat pocket and placed it carefully on the table. Holmes took it without hesitation and held it up to the light, the liquid inside shimmering faintly. "Fascinating," he murmured. "An elixir for the body, perhaps, but a poison for the soul. Watson, do you recognize this substance?" I examined it closely but shook my head. "No, Holmes. It's unlike anything I've encountered in my medical practice." Holmes smiled faintly, as though he had expected that response. "Lestrade, did you notice anything else? Letters, documents, or any signs of who may have visited him recently?" "We're still investigating," Lestrade admitted. "But Cranston was a private man. His butler swears that no visitors were seen entering the study last night. He locked the door from the inside, which we had to break open this morning." "And the letter he was writing?" Holmes asked. Lestrade pulled out a folded piece of paper. "It was incomplete, but it seems like he was drafting something about business dealings, nothing that struck us as significant." Holmes skimmed the letter quickly before placing it aside. "We'll examine it further. For now, I'm more interested in this vial and the condition of the body. Watson, we shall accompany Lestrade to Cranston's estate immediately. There is much to learn from the scene of the crime." We arrived at Cranston's grand home in Mayfair within the hour, the imposing structure casting long shadows over its neatly trimmed garden. The butler, a pale and visibly shaken man, greeted us at the door and led us to the study. The room was just as Lestrade had described, opulent yet subdued, with dark mahogany furniture and shelves filled with leather-bound volumes. A large desk dominated the space, and there, still seated as though in quiet contemplation, was Lord Henry Cranston. His face was serene, his eyes partially closed, and his hand rested on the desk near the quill. The sight of him sent a shiver down my spine, for there was indeed something unnerving about his appearance. His skin, though pale, retained a subtle glow, as if life had only recently fled his body. Holmes wasted no time. He examined the body closely, lifting Cranston's hand to inspect the fingers. "Stiff, but not entirely rigid," he muttered. "The onset of rigor mortis is delayed. Curious, Watson, do you see any signs of cyanosis?" I leaned in and examined Cranston's lips and nails. "None that I can detect. If he were poisoned, it wasn't by any of the common toxins." "Precisely," Holmes said, rising to his feet. He turned his attention to the desk where the vial had been placed. "The answer lies here, Watson. This substance is no ordinary concoction. We shall need to analyze it further, but I suspect it is related to the treatments we discussed with Dr. Fairburn." "Fairburn?" Lestrade asked, his brow lifting. "The physician?" "What has he to do with this?" Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Yes. When we visited Dr. Fairburn's clinic, I noticed Cranston's portrait among the many on the walls, a man of wealth and influence seeking to defy the ravages of time. Lord Cranston was one of his clients, and Fairburn's work in age-reversal therapies raises questions that we can no longer ignore. The preservation of Cranston's body, the peculiar liquid, these are not coincidences." Lestrade nodded, clearly beginning to grasp the gravity of the situation. "You think Fairburn is involved in more than just medical experiments, then?" "I do," Holmes replied, his gaze darkening. "We're not dealing with a mere murderer, Lestrade. We're dealing with someone who believes they've conquered death. And that belief, Watson," he added, turning to me, "is often the most dangerous kind." As we left the study, the weight of Holmes's words settled over me like a heavy fog. This case, I realized, was unlike any we had encountered before, one where the boundaries between science, ambition, and mortality blurred into something sinister. Holmes's sense of urgency was palpable, and I knew that our investigation was only beginning. Chapter 4. The Secret Beneath the Floorboards. We returned to Lord Cranston's estate under the guise of assisting Lestrade with his ongoing investigation. The morning mist had lifted, but the air remained damp, clinging to our coats as we entered the grand residence once more. The butler, visibly more composed than during our previous visit, guided us again to the study, where the ghost of Cranston's lifeless form seemed to linger despite the absence of the body. The air was heavy, as though the walls themselves harboured secrets. Lestrade excused himself to oversee other aspects of the investigation, leaving Holmes and me to our devices. Holmes paced the room methodically, his gaze sweeping across the bookshelves, the desk, and the fireplace, before finally settling on the ornate rug that lay at the room's centre. "This rug, Watson," he said, stopping abruptly, "is far too luxurious to serve merely as decoration. Notice how it bulges ever so slightly along the edges, as though something beneath it resists the weight of the fabric." I knelt and ran my hand along the surface. There was indeed an unevenness beneath the thick pile. "You think something is hidden under here?" Holmes gave a faint smile, the kind that often accompanied a revelation he was certain of. "Help me move the desk slightly, Watson. We shall see what treasures lie beneath." With some effort, we shifted the heavy mahogany desk just enough to roll back the rug, revealing a section of floorboards that appeared subtly misaligned with the rest. Holmes produced a small knife from his coat pocket and expertly worked the blade into the crevice between two planks. With a soft creak, the floorboards lifted, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. The compartment was shallow but carefully constructed, and within it lay a bundle of letters bound together by a silk ribbon. The paper was aged, but the ink remained bold, as though the contents had been preserved deliberately. Holmes retrieved the bundle and handed it to me. "Let us see what secrets Cranston was hiding," he said. I untied the ribbon and unfolded the top letter. The handwriting was neat but urgent, the kind of script belonging to a man both meticulous and desperate. I began to read aloud. "My dear Lord Cranston, I trust this letter finds you in good spirits and continuing to benefit from the treatments. As promised, your vitality should improve with each session. However, I must caution you, as I have with all my clients, that the process is not without risks. The body's capacity to adapt is limited, and exceeding these limits could result in adverse consequences. I urge you to adhere strictly to the dosage I have prescribed. Any deviation may result in accelerated deterioration, a phenomenon I refer to as the reversal cost. The details of this are outlined in our initial agreement, but should you have any concerns, do not hesitate to contact me directly. Yours sincerely, Dr. Victor Fairbairn." Holmes's eyes narrowed as I finished reading. He took the letter from my hands and examined the signature closely. "Fairbairn's handwriting is as distinctive as his reputation. Note the firm downward strokes, a man who believes in control, though it is clear from the contents that his control was slipping." I flipped through the other letters, each containing similar warnings and reassurances, though the tone grew increasingly ominous with each exchange. The final letter was particularly alarming. "Lord Cranston, I regret to inform you that your recent symptoms are indicative of the very phenomenon I warned you about. The reversal cost is manifesting, and unless immediate action is taken, the degradation may become irreversible. I advise you to discontinue all treatments and await further instructions. Under no circumstances should you attempt to self-administer the elixir beyond the prescribed amount. Doing so could result in catastrophic failure of the body's regenerative processes. Time is of the essence, Dr. Victor Fairbairn. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Holmes, these letters suggest Cranston was aware of the dangers, but chose to continue the treatments nonetheless. Indeed, Holmes replied, slipping the final letter into his coat pocket. Greed and the fear of mortality are powerful motivators, Watson. Cranston was likely convinced he could cheat death until the cost proved too great. He knelt by the hidden compartment again, inspecting its edges with the meticulous precision of a man uncovering the final pieces of a puzzle. His fingers traced the wood grain before he tapped lightly on the compartment's interior. A hollow sound echoed back. "There is more," he murmured, retrieving his knife once more and prying open a false bottom within the compartment. Beneath it lay a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn but intact. Holmes opened the journal and flipped through its pages, his eyes scanning the entries with the intensity of a predator, closing in on its prey. This is Cranston's personal log of the treatments. He documented every injection, every symptom, every vision he experienced. Here, on this page, he describes vivid dreams of his youth, memories of places and people long forgotten. Fairburn mentioned these dreams when we visited him. "But dreams alone wouldn't kill a man," I said. Holmes snapped the journal shut. "No, but what follows would." Cranston records severe fatigue, hallucinations, and finally, a sense of detachment from his own body. He writes that he felt as though he were watching himself from a distance, powerless to intervene. These are not merely side effects, Watson. They are symptoms of a body being pushed beyond its limits. He stood, pocketing the journal alongside the letter. It's not life they were prolonging, Watson. It's an illusion, a fragile facade that crumbles under the weight of reality. And that illusion, if left unchecked, will consume its final victim. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. "You think there will be more victims?" "I am certain of it," Holmes replied, his gaze hardening. "Fairburn's methods are no longer medical experiments. They are a death sentence for those who dare to defy nature. We must act swiftly before another name is added to his ledger. Come, Watson, we have much to do." As we replaced the floorboards and restored the room to its original state, I couldn't help but feel that the secrets we had uncovered were merely the beginning of a darker, more sinister mystery. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated, as though the puzzle pieces were aligning perfectly in his mind. And as we stepped out into the brisk afternoon air, I realized that this case was not just a test of Holmes's intellect, it was a race against time. Chapter 5. A Stolen Corpse. The crisp morning air was deceptively calm as Holmes and we made our way through the bustling streets of London, the city gradually stirring to life beneath the grey sky. We had scarcely finished breakfast when a hurried messenger had arrived, bearing a note from Inspector Lestrade. "Urgent matter at St. Bartholomew's Hospital. Meet me there at once." "The timing is too precise to be mere coincidence," Holmes remarked as we left to hail a cab. "Something has happened to Lord Cranston's body. Mark my words, Watson, this is a development orchestrated by a mind desperate to cover its tracks." The cab clattered along the cobblestone streets, and within minutes the grand facade of St. Bartholomew's Hospital came into view. As we disembarked, the tension in the air was palpable. Nurses bustled about, and orderlies whispered in clusters near the entrance, their faces betraying a mixture of curiosity and dread. Inside, Lestrade was waiting for us near the mortuary. His usually impassive face was flushed with irritation. "Holmes, I knew you'd want to be involved in this. Cranston's body has vanished." "Vanished?" I echoed, struggling to comprehend the gravity of the statement. "Yes," Lestrade confirmed, leading us down a dimly lit corridor that smelled faintly of disinfectant and decay. "The body was here last night, scheduled for autopsy this morning. When the coroner arrived, the slab was empty. No sign of forced entry, no alarms triggered. It's as if Cranston simply walked out. Holmes raised an eyebrow. Or was carried out, he murmured. Who had access to the mortuary during the night? The night porter, a man named James Cuff, Lestrade replied. He's missing as well. No one has seen him since last night's shift. His quarters in the hospital are empty, and his belongings are gone. We reached the mortuary door, which Lestrade unlocked with a grim efficiency. The room was cold and sterile, its walls lined with shelves of surgical instruments and jars containing preserved specimens. At the centre of the room lay the empty slab where Cranston's body should have been. Holmes approached the slab with the intensity of a man on the scent of his prey. He ran his fingers lightly over the surface, his gaze sharp and calculating. "Watson, come here," he called. "Tell me what you see." I joined him, examining the slab closely. At first glance it appeared clean, but upon closer inspection I noticed a faint dusting of white powder clinging to its surface. "It's powder of some sort," I observed. "Perhaps a chemical residue." Holmes nodded, withdrawing a small glass vial from his coat pocket and carefully collecting a sample. "We shall analyze this back at Baker Street. My initial suspicion is that this powder is a sedative or preservative compound, something used to maintain the illusion of life in the deceased. But there is another possibility. It could be a corrosive substance meant to hasten the body's decomposition." Lestrade's expression darkened. "Why would anyone want to destroy the body?" "Because, Inspector," Holmes replied, straightening, "bodies have ways of speaking long after death. Cranston's corpse could reveal more about the methods used by our elusive doctor, Fairbairn, or whoever else is pulling the strings. By removing the body, they intend to silence those secrets permanently." "What of the missing porter?" I asked, glancing at Lestrade. "We're searching for him," Lestrade said. "But given the timing, it's possible he's been bribed or coerced into assisting with the theft. He's a man of modest means, and a large enough sum could easily sway him." Holmes paced the room, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "It is equally possible that Cuff did not act willingly. If Fairbairn or his accomplices feared exposure, they may have removed both the body and the porter to eliminate loose ends. Dead men, after all, cannot speak to the police." The thought sent a chill down my spine. "Holmes, if they are willing to go to such lengths, then our adversary is far more dangerous than we anticipated." Holmes paused, his gaze meeting mine with a mixture of determination and intensity. "Yes, Watson. But desperation often breeds mistakes, and it is in those mistakes that we shall find our advantage. Come, we have work to do." Before leaving the mortuary, Holmes conducted one final examination of the surrounding area, his keen eyes scanning for any detail that might have been overlooked. He stopped near the door and crouched down, examining a set of faint scuff marks on the floor. "The body was removed by 2 individuals," he deduced. "The drag marks are uneven, suggesting that one of them was either smaller or less experienced. This supports the theory that the porter was involved either as a willing participant or under duress." Lestrade jotted down the observation in his notebook. "And where do you think they took the body?" "Somewhere it can be hidden or destroyed," Holmes replied. "A medical facility under Fairbairn's control, perhaps, or a more discreet location outside the city where decomposition can run its course uninterrupted. Either way, we must act quickly. Time is not on our side." As we made our way out of the hospital, I couldn't help but voice my growing concern. "Holmes, if Fairbairn has Cranston's body, what do you suppose he intends to do with it?" "That depends," Holmes said, his tone contemplative. "If his goal is to destroy evidence, then we may already be too late. But if he needs the body for further experimentation, there is still a chance to intervene. Fairbairn's arrogance is his greatest flaw, Watson. He believes himself untouchable, but no man, no matter how brilliant, is immune to oversight. We reached Baker Street just as the first raindrops began to fall, pattering softly against the cobblestones. Inside, the familiar warmth of our sitting room was a welcome reprieve from the damp chill outside. Holmes wasted no time setting up his chemical apparatus and carefully analyzing the powder sample we had collected. I watched in silence as he worked, the rhythmic clinking of glassware and the faint hiss of the Bunsen burner filling the room. Finally, Holmes straightened, holding up a vial containing a clear liquid. "As I suspected," he said. "This powder is a mixture of chloroform and a rare preservative compound. It would have temporarily slowed the body's decomposition, giving Fairbairn time to conduct his experiments." "Then Cranston's death was no accident," I said. "He was killed for the sake of science, or perhaps for something far more sinister." Holmes placed the vial on the table and lit his pipe, the smoke curling upward like the tendrils of thought weaving through his mind. "Fairbairn believes he can outwit us, Watson, but he underestimates the power of observation and deduction. We are closing in on him, and when we do, the web of deception he has spun will unravel spectacularly." The room fell silent, save for the crackling of the fire and the distant hum of the city beyond the window. Though the mystery of Cranston's stolen corpse loomed large, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. With Holmes leading the way, I knew that even the most elusive secrets would soon be laid bare. Chapter 6. The Woman in the Shadows. The fog clung to the streets of Whitechapel like a shroud as our carriage made its way through the maze of narrow alleys and dimly lit passages. Holmes had discovered Eleanor Brandt's name during a meticulous review of the letters retrieved from Lord Cranston's hidden compartment. One particular letter, folded neatly at the bottom of the bundle, contained Fairbairn's notes on various patients. There, in Fairbairn's distinctive handwriting, was a brief but telling reference to Brandt, a promising subject with vocal and physical rejuvenation, now considered unstable. That mention had seized Holmes's attention immediately. After further inquiries made through his network of informants, he had learned that Eleanor Brandt, once a celebrated opera singer, now lived in isolation in a boarding house on the fringes of Whitechapel. It was there that we now travelled, guided by the belief that her knowledge of Fairbairn's treatments could be the missing link in our investigation. The cobblestones glistened with moisture, and the faint odour of damp stone and coal smoke hung heavily in the air. Holmes had been silent for most of the journey, his gaze fixed out the window, lost in contemplation. "Whitechapel," I murmured, watching the shadowy figures of dock workers and vagrants disappear into the fog. "It seems fitting that we find ourselves here, considering the darkness of our current mystery." Holmes did not respond, but his lips pressed together slightly, a sure sign that his mind was working furiously. When at last the carriage pulled to a stop outside a dilapidated boarding house, he finally spoke. "This, Watson, is where our search for answers must continue. Eleanor Brandt resides here. If my deductions are correct, she may be the key to unlocking Fairbairn's secrets." The boarding house was a sagging structure with peeling paint and windows fogged from within. A flickering oil lamp cast a weak light over the entrance, where a rusted iron knocker hung askew. Holmes rapped sharply on the door, and after a few moments a woman with a weathered face and suspicious eyes appeared. "We're here to see Miss Eleanor Brandt," Holmes said, his voice polite but firm. The woman frowned. "Miss Brandt doesn't take visitors. She's unwell." Holmes slipped a coin into her hand. "I believe she will make an exception." The woman hesitated, then stepped aside, gesturing for us to enter. We were led up a narrow staircase that creaked with every step, the walls lined with faded floral wallpaper that peeled at the edges. At the end of the corridor, the woman knocked lightly on a door. "Miss Brant, there's someone here to see you." A faint voice replied, "Let them in." We entered a small, dimly lit room that smelled faintly of stale air and lavender. Sitting in a chair by the window was Eleanor Brant, once a celebrated opera singer whose voice had captivated London's elite. But the woman before us now was a shadow of her former self. Her once glorious auburn hair was streaked with grey, her skin pale and lined far beyond her years. She wrapped a shawl tightly around her thin frame, as if warding off an unseen chill. "Miss Brant," Holmes said gently, taking a seat across from her. "My name is Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. John Watson. We are investigating Dr. Victor Fairburn, and we believe you may be able to help us." At the mention of Fairburn's name, her eyes widened and her hands trembled. "Fairburn," she whispered, "you shouldn't have come. He watches those who try to expose him." "Then you know the danger he poses," Holmes said. "Please, Miss Brant, tell us what you know. We may be your only chance for justice." For a moment, she seemed torn between fear and desperation. Then, with a deep breath, she began to speak. "I met Dr. Fairburn 5 years ago. I had just turned 35, and though I was still performing, I could feel time catching up with me. My voice wasn't what it used to be, and the critics were starting to notice. Then I heard about Fairburn's treatments. Miraculous, they said. Rejuvenation of the body and spirit. I was desperate, so I sought him out." Her voice cracked, and she paused to steady herself. Holmes gestured for her to continue. "At first it was everything he promised," she said. "After the first few injections, my skin regained its glow and my energy returned. My voice was stronger, my performances flawless. It was as if I had turned back the clock. But then the nightmares began." "Nightmares?" I asked, leaning forward. She nodded. "Visions of strange places and people I didn't recognize. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. Fairburn told me it was a side effect, nothing to worry about. But the visions grew worse. I began seeing shadows even when I was awake. My health deteriorated rapidly. Within months, I had aged 20 years. "Fairburn abandoned you once the symptoms appeared, didn't he?" Holmes said. She let out a bitter laugh. "Yes. He stopped responding to my letters, and when I confronted him, he dismissed me as a failed case. But I know the truth. His treatments don't prolong life, they consume it. He collects the souls of the desperate, feeding off their fear of death." The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down on us. I could see the pain in her eyes, a woman betrayed by hope. "Miss Brant," Holmes said softly, "do you still have any of the documents Fairburn gave you? Medical records, instructions, anything that might help us understand his methods?" She hesitated, then nodded. Rising unsteadily, she crossed the room to a small chest and retrieved a bundle of papers tied with twine. "These are all I have left. Some of it is in his handwriting, but much of it is symbols and diagrams I couldn't decipher." Holmes accepted the bundle and flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowing as he examined the cryptic symbols and alchemical notations. "This is no ordinary medical treatment," he muttered. "Fairburn has blended science with something far older and far more dangerous." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Alchemy, Watson. Ritualistic practices masquerading as science. Fairburn has combined chemical compounds with ancient rites designed to manipulate the life force itself. It's not medicine he's practicing, it's sorcery." He turned to Miss Brant. "You've done more for us than you realize. We will expose Fairburn and put an end to his experiments." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, Mr. Holmes, make him pay for what he's done." "We intend to," Holmes said, rising to his feet. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder before turning to me. "Come, Watson, we have what we need." As we stepped back into the fog-drenched street, Holmes's expression was grim but resolute. "Fairbairn's experiment is not medical," he said, almost to himself. "It's ritualistic. We are chasing something older than science and colder than death. And now, Watson, we must be prepared for whatever lies ahead." Chapter 7. The Trap is Set. It was a grey morning when Lady Margaret Statham arrived at 221B Baker Street, her veil concealing her anxious features but doing little to hide the tremor in her hands. Holmes had already anticipated her visit and sat by the window, his fingers steepled beneath his chin as he gazed out at the fog rolling through Baker Street. "Lady Margaret," I said, rising to greet her, "please do come in." She entered with hesitant steps, and Holmes gestured toward the chair opposite his own. "You have received my instructions, I presume?" "Yes, Mr. Holmes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am ready to do as you ask. But are you certain this is the only way?" Holmes nodded, his gaze unwavering. "If we are to expose Dr. Fairbairn, we must provoke him into revealing the truth. You are the ideal candidate, Lady Margaret. Fairbairn will see you as another wealthy client desperate to preserve her youth. He will not resist." "And what happens when he realizes it is a trap?" she asked. "By then," Holmes said with a faint smile, "it will be too late for him to escape." The plan was simple but dangerous. Lady Margaret would visit Dr. Fairbairn's private study under the guise of a potential patient seeking his rejuvenation treatments. Once inside, she would engage him in conversation long enough for Holmes and me to make our move. Lestrade and 2 constables would be stationed outside, ready to act on Holmes's signal. By midday we had arrived at Fairbairn's clinic in Kensington, an opulent building that masked the horrors hidden within. Lady Margaret, dressed in an elegant but subdued gown, stepped out of the carriage and ascended the marble steps with practised grace. Holmes and I watched from a distance as the door opened and she was ushered inside. "He will be cautious," Holmes murmured, "but not cautious enough." We waited for what felt like an eternity, the minutes stretching into an unbearable silence punctuated only by the occasional clip-clop of a passing carriage. Then at last Holmes gave the signal. We approached the clinic swiftly and quietly, entering through the side door that Holmes had picked the previous night to ensure our access. The corridor was dimly lit and eerily silent, save for the faint murmur of voices coming from Fairbairn's study. Holmes motioned for me to follow, and we crept toward the door, which was slightly ajar. Through the gap we could see Lady Margaret seated in a plush chair, her posture composed despite the tension in her hands. Dr. Victor Fairbairn stood before her, a man of refined appearance but with a coldness in his eyes that betrayed his detachment. On the desk beside him lay a small vial containing a translucent liquid that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light. "This, Lady Statham," Fairbairn was saying, holding up the vial, "is the culmination of decades of research. With just a few doses, you will feel years younger. Your skin, your energy, your very essence will be restored." Lady Margaret feigned fascination, leaning slightly forward. "And you are certain it is safe? I have heard unsettling rumors about your treatments." Fairbairn chuckled softly, a sound devoid of warmth. "There will always be detractors, my lady. But I assure you, those who follow my instructions precisely have nothing to fear." Holmes chose that moment to act. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, his sudden presence startling Fairbairn. I followed close behind, shutting the door firmly behind us. "Mr. Holmes!" Fairburn exclaimed, his composure slipping for the first time. His gaze darted to the vial, then to Lady Margaret, and the realization dawned upon him. "This is a set-up." "Indeed it is," Holmes replied, his voice calm but firm. "And you have played your part perfectly, Dr. Fairburn. Please, do not make this more difficult than it needs to be." Fairburn's eyes flickered toward the window, calculating his chances of escape. But before he could act, Holmes stepped closer, blocking his path. "You won't make it far," Holmes warned. Lestrade and his men are waiting just outside. In a desperate move, Fairburn lunged for the vial, but Holmes was faster. He grabbed Fairburn by the wrist, twisting it just enough to make him cry out and drop the vial. It shattered against the floor, releasing a pungent, acrid smell that filled the room. "Careful, Watson," Holmes said, pulling me back as the fumes spread. "Whatever that substance is, we do not want prolonged exposure." Fairburn struggled briefly before Holmes forced him into the chair Lady Margaret had vacated. Lestrade and the constables burst into the room moments later, their presence ensuring Fairburn's capture. "Dr. Fairburn," Lestrade said, stepping forward, "you are under arrest for conspiracy fraud and, based on what Mr. Holmes has shared, likely far worse." Fairburn sneered, his confidence returning in small doses. "You have no proof of anything beyond my treatments. My clients come willingly. There is nothing illegal about what I do." Holmes smiled faintly, reaching into his coat and producing the bundle of documents we had collected from Eleanor Brant and Lord Cranston's estate. "These letters, combined with the testimony of your victims, will say otherwise. You have manipulated the wealthy and the desperate, promising them immortality while knowingly condemning them to rapid deterioration and death. You may have thought yourself untouchable, but even you could not silence all your victims." Fairburn's expression darkened, and for the first time I saw fear flash across his face. As the constables led him out of the room, Holmes turned to me, his demeanor contemplative. "We have him, Watson," he said. "But one final puzzle remains, Fairburn's motive. Why would a man of science resort to such cruel deception?" "You believe the motive will be revealed soon?" I asked. "I do," Holmes replied, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "With Fairburn in custody and his records in hand, we are close to understanding what drove him to ruin lives in pursuit of this twisted endeavor. But for now, Watson, let us be content that we have struck a decisive blow against his scheme." Chapter 8. The Man Who Cheated Death. The fog outside the window of 221 B. Baker Street curled like ghostly tendrils, wrapping itself around the gas lamps lining the street. Inside, the glow of the fire illuminated Holmes's features as he worked with single-minded intensity. On the table before him lay the shattered remains of the vial recovered from Fairburn's clinic. The acrid fumes had long since dissipated, but the mystery of its contents remained potent. "Careful, Watson," Holmes said as I leaned in to observe. "This substance is far more complex than I originally suspected. The initial analysis revealed traces of common hallucinogens, but there is something more insidious lurking here." I watched as he carefully poured a small quantity of the residue into a glass container and added a few drops of a reagent. The mixture frothed and turned a deep shade of crimson. Holmes observed it closely before jotting down notes in his notebook. "What have you found?" I asked. Holmes placed the vial aside and leaned back in his chair, tapping the end of his pen against his chin. "This concoction is a blend of rare toxins, some derived from exotic plants found only in the depths of South America, and powerful hallucinogens designed to alter the perception of time and reality. Combined, they create the illusion of rejuvenation, stimulating the body and mind to temporary vitality, but the effects are short-lived, and the price for this fleeting youth is devastating. I felt a chill run through me. Then it wasn't a cure at all, it was a cruel illusion. Holmes nodded gravely. Indeed, the substance forces the body into overdrive, temporarily reversing the visible signs of aging. But once the effects wear off, the body collapses under the strain. Cells deteriorate at an accelerated rate, organs fail, and the patient rapidly succumbs to premature aging. In Sir Edwin Statham's case, it caused his untimely death. I thought back to Lady Margaret's initial visit and the mysterious letter signed by her deceased father. And the letter Sir Edwin supposedly wrote after his death? That was Fairbairn's doing as well, wasn't it? Precisely, Holmes said, rising from his chair and pacing the room. Fairbairn crafted the letter to extort money from grieving family members. By convincing them that their loved ones could be brought back through further treatments, he exploited their desperation. The promise of resurrection, Watson, an offer no grieving soul could easily refuse. It's monstrous, I muttered, clenching my fists. Monstrous, yes, Holmes agreed, pausing by the window. But effective. Fairbairn knew that the wealthy would pay exorbitant sums for even the slightest hope of defeating death, and so he built his fortune on false promises. Holmes's deductions continued as he returned to the table and sifted through Fairbairn's documents. But there is another layer to this mystery that we must address. The murder of Lord Cranston was an anomaly. While Fairbairn's actions were despicable, he was not, by nature, a murderer. Then who killed Cranston? I asked. Holmes held up a letter bearing a smudged wax seal, the same letter we had recovered from Cranston's hidden compartment. Cranston had been blackmailing Fairbairn. His letters demanded a substantial sum in exchange for his silence. When Fairbairn refused to comply, Cranston threatened to expose the truth. So Fairbairn killed him to protect himself? Holmes shook his head. No, Watson, Fairbairn did not kill Cranston. The murderer was Fairbairn's assistant, a man named Charles Bennet. I blinked in surprise. Bennet? We haven't encountered that name before. He has kept to the shadows, but his role in Fairbairn's operation was significant, Holmes explained. Bennet was responsible for administering the treatments and managing Fairbairn's records. He was privy to everything. When Cranston threatened to go public, it was Bennet who took matters into his own hands. Fairbairn, unwilling to dirty his hands with murder, turned a blind eye. But Bennet's greed and desperation drove him to silence Cranston permanently. How do you know this? I asked, marvelling once again at Holmes's deductive brilliance. The scuff marks near the window in Cranston's study, Holmes replied. They indicated a struggle involving two men, one of whom attempted to escape through the window but was ultimately subdued. I also found traces of a specific type of shoe polish near the scene, the same brand favoured by Bennet as noted in Fairbairn's staff logs, but the final confirmation came from Fairbairn's own records. Bennet had been given access to Cranston's private quarters on multiple occasions under the guise of delivering treatments. And Fairbairn allowed this to happen to protect himself, I said, the pieces finally falling into place. Exactly. Fairbairn believed that by remaining uninvolved he could avoid culpability, but in the end his guilt lies not only in the crimes he directly committed, but also in the ones he permitted. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the revelation settling over me. So Cranston's death, the fraudulent letters, the deterioration of Fairbairn's patients, all of it was part of a larger scheme built on deception and greed. Holmes lit his pipe and inhaled deeply, the smoke curling upward like the unfurling threads of a mystery finally resolved. Yes, Watson. Fairbairn sought to cheat death, but he ended up playing a different game entirely, one that led to his downfall. Cranston's death was the inevitable consequence of Fairbairn's ambition spiralling out of control, and now justice has caught up with him. We sat in silence for a moment, the crackling fire the only sound in the room. I could not help but reflect on the sheer audacity of Fairbairn's scheme and the lives it had destroyed. "You were right, Holmes," I said finally. "Death is the one truth we cannot cheat, but men like Fairbairn will always try." Holmes nodded, gazing out the window as the fog thickened, obscuring the world beyond. "Indeed, Watson, death is inevitable, but the fear of it drives men to madness. Fairbairn thought he could bargain with the inevitable, but in the end, all he achieved was a fleeting illusion. Let this be a reminder, Watson, that those who attempt to play God often find themselves undone by their own arrogance." As the clock chimed the hour, I felt a sense of closure settle over the room. The case of the man who cheated death had reached its conclusion, and with it, another chapter in the annals of Sherlock Holmes's remarkable career. Thank you for tuning in to Cafe Stories. If you enjoyed the intrigue and suspense, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on more captivating detective adventures. Your support keeps the stories coming and the mysteries alive.